We now have our pistons connected to our drive shaft, and now we need to hook in the rest of the motor. And this is mostly the drives, the push rods, and the rocker arms. So let's take a quick look at how this is all supposed to work. We've got this crankshaft, and attached to it are two cams. Now each one of these cams pushes up on this push rod, which in turn pushes up on this rocker arm, which lifts a valve. And then we also have this spring here to keep everything together. So let's focus on the cam and the push rod. So I want this cam to rotate in Z, and then when it hits that push rod, I want that to move up. And then when this is out of the way, the push rod drops back down. So the easiest way to do this is by using what's called a set-driven key. Now before I do that, I'm actually going to go ahead and animate the cam so that we can set up the set-driven key. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. Just do a set key here at frame 1. I'm going to move forward, let's say about a second, so to frame 31. And then I'm just going to rotate it in Z by 360 degrees and set another key. So now this is just going through one full rotation. So I'm going to go ahead and select my push rod, and let's add a set-driven key. So I'm going to go into my animation tool set, go into key, set-driven key, set. And so this brings up the set-driven key window. In the driven field, we have our push rod. So we want to load the cam into the driver because the cam is what's driving this whole system. So I'm going to go ahead and do load driver. So we're rotating the cam around Z. And we want this push rod to go up in Y. So I'm going to go translate Y connected to rotate Z. Now this is already set up so that the cam is touching the bottom of the push rod. So that'll be our first instance here. So we're going to go ahead and press key, and that'll set up our first condition. Then I'm going to go ahead and scroll forward a little bit to say about frame 6 or so. And then I'm going to move this up. So as you can see, this is going to be pushing up this push rod. And you can see I've pushed it up almost exactly 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and round that off to 1. And I'm going to do another key. So now you can see how this pushes that up. And you can see here it's pushing not quite enough. So I'm going to go ahead and move that up just a little bit. Press another key here. So you can see now that as the cam rotates, it pushes up the push rod. But then the cam moves out of the way and the push rod drops. So what we need to do is drop that down back to 0. So we'll drop it to 0, hit key, and now we should have a good motion. So there we go. So now we've got our first push rod in place. And so now once I have this, I can go ahead and select the cam and delete those keys. So let's go ahead and set up the other one. So I'm going to go over to this side here, and this is 180 degrees opposite, but we can still use a set-driven key. So I'm going to select this cam, set a key at 1, go to frame 31, do 360 and rotate Z, set that key, and there we go. So when we get to the halfway point, around frame 16, we're going to have that condition again. So all we need to do is set up our set-driven key for this side. So I'm going to go ahead and select my push rod, key, set-driven key. So now that we have this loaded, we can select our cam and load that as the driver. And again, we're going to do rotate Z is going to affect translate Y. So all we have to do is set a key here, move this forward a bit, and lift this up. Move this up to about 1, set a key, and then drop it back down to 0 and set another key. So now this one here, we can move this up a little bit more and key that. So now you can see how we've got this push rod working as well. So now we have both of the push rods working. And so the next step is to connect the cams to the crankshaft.